So the purpose of this evening is to review the second phase of the Churchill Master Plan. And so we have a number of city staff and a special guest with us tonight. So what I would like to do, if that's okay, is have everyone introduce themselves. And then we'll just, after we do that, we'll give a brief overview of the roadmap for the evening and the purpose and of course, the order in which things are going to go. So if I may, I would like to begin with introduction. Cynthia, may I begin with you for a brief introduction of who you are and what you do in the city organization?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Cynthia Graham. I'm the manager of landscape architectural services that falls within environmental services and public works. My team does all of the park and trail development across the city, both in new growth areas as well as at existing parks that need a little bit of love. We come in and figure out what we need to do, and we manage the project from the very beginning, public consultation, all the way through to construction. So that's my team. I'm the person who manages most of the budgets, and Ken and Megan are the doers. So that's our rules.
Thank you. Megan, may I ask you for a brief introduction?
Okay, good. Hi, my name's Megan Stewart. As mentioned by Cynthia, we work in landscape architectural services, and I work closely with Ken as well as other project managers to undertake park and trail development across the city. My role tonight will be to assist in answering questions where necessary, but I will also be recording questions as well as answers just to keep a record of what's talked about this evening.
Thank you so much. And Ken, who is very familiar with Churchill from the city. Ken?
Hi, everyone. My name is Ken Wheaton. I'm a landscape architect with Landscape Architectural Services. I'm the project manager for phase 2. I was also coincidentally project manager for phase 1. So I'm fairly familiar with Churchill Park, the implementation of the master plan. My role tonight will be to assist in answering any questions if we need to. Thanks.
All of these people are special, but of course there's someone really special to me who's on, and it's Tice. I'm sure if you're in and around Churchill or any part of the RBG, you know Tice. I've had the good fortune of being in his company quite a bit over the last year and a half to 2 years. And he's been a great instructor to me, and I've always learned a lot when I'm with him. So I'm so pleased he was able to join us tonight. And Tice, a little maybe a profile of your actual title at the RBG for those very few people in West Hill who may not know.
I would be the head of natural areas at the Botanical Gardens. I've been around the Botanical Gardens since the early 90s. I was a little kid in Westdale there too. I'm the head of natural areas, which means I keep track of and work with people to do conservation projects basically across the Royal Botanical Gardens property, if it's not a facility, if it's not a garden. So basically 2,400 acres of adventure.
Of magic.
Yep, and represent the property owner of the park here also.
Yes, so there may be some people who are joining us this evening who are brand new to Hamilton or brand new to the area and may not know the history of Churchill and may not know the fact that it actually belongs to the RBG, and that the city, we just take up the partial role of steward of it and have public access to it. So the reason you're here is because of that connection, and also to speak to some of the, if we're asked, the principles behind the master plan and particularly the work that's being done along the periphery of the park and efforts to stabilize the ravines and the importance of the native planting and those sorts of things. So thank you very much for being here. We're going to hand it over to landscape architect to walk us through what is the plan for the second phase of the Churchill master plan.
So that's great. So yeah, we're here today to talk about phase 2 of the Churchill Park Master Plan implementation. And I'll just run through a bit of history and then talk about what we've done to date and then talk about phase 2. And then as we mentioned, we're happy to answer the questions that you have. I'll just note at the bottom here, we do have a website set up for this project. So all of our information can be found at that link. Pretty easy to remember. And all of our contact information is there as well. So the Churchill Park Management Plan, this was created to guide the preservation and rejuvenation of Churchill Park. There was extensive consultation and that created a vision and a key goal were created. So directly from the management plan, Churchill Park is a unique, open, and strikingly beautiful space that embraces the natural heritage of Cootes Paradise. Central to the community, the park enhances the health and well-being of everyone in all seasons. And the goal of the management plan was to preserve our existing open space and encourage an adaptable, inviting, safe, beautiful, and sustainable environment that reflects the community's values, provides a community gathering space, and facilitates participation in activities for everyone. And it's really that vision and goal that guides how we are proceeding with the implementation and how the master plan was created. And this came directly from the consultation that we did with the community. So the background, as Councillor Wilson mentioned, the park is actually owned by the Royal Botanical Gardens, but jointly operated by the RBG as well as us for portions of it. It's adjacent to Cootes Paradise, the natural forest, and is within the Niagara Escarpment Parks and Open Space System. We all call that NEPOS, and the Conservation Authority regulated areas. And that's important when we get to implementation of projects because they are permit approving bodies. The management plan was required to establish direction for the long-term protection, development, and management of the park, and included extensive consultation. There was a public stakeholder advisory group, which many of you might have been a part of. There was general public meetings to talk about the plans and the goals and to verify the findings. And there was a staff stakeholder group as well. There also were some separate studies that were done that have influenced the management plan, including a drainage study that was looking at basement flooding issues in the surrounding areas. And the management plan was approved by the Niagara Escarpment Commission in February of 2018, and that was really the big step we needed to get through in order to start implementing. And once that approval came through, we worked diligently to try and get phase 1 done, which was completed last year. And there again, the link for the website page for this project is there. So this is the master plan that I'm sure many of you have seen. It talks about all of the goals and the different things that we would like to achieve and that we're responding to the needs of the community as we understood them. So I just wanted to say the final designs, this is a concept plan. When we get into detailed design, sometimes we find things like geotechnical information. We did extensive archaeology through the project. So just want to have the caveat that things might not look exactly the same as this. The shapes of these rain gardens might differ slightly, but the intent is there that will guide us to be able to implement the management plan and the goals that were laid out by the community. This includes all of the things that we're trying to do, but we categorized it in the document in short, medium, and long-term priorities. And we will have to implement this in phases so that we can budget for the different projects as they come forward. So this is what we were able to do to date, the things outlined in blue, and there's some areas in the management plan that were outlined in blue, so I'll just go through them quickly. Of the short-term priorities, the rain gardens in the lower plateau area, so that's these ones here that I'm sure you're familiar with if you've visited the park in the last little while. 2.5 meter wide granular pathway extending from the intersection of Marion Avenue and Dromore. So this one here and goes all the way through. Continuing to the field house, 2.5 meter wide granular pathway extending from the driveway of the former teaching garden. So this one here. The North Park entrance and trailhead for the Westdale Ravine Trail, that was completed. And then there was some reforestation work done here in conjunction with the Royal Botanical Gardens. We are in progress to install a public art feature in this area that has been selected. The final piece has been selected, and they're just working through the detailed design of that. And we are working on replacement of the playground, and that's through a different group than ours, but I understand that that is to happen in 2020. Of the medium-term priorities, we have completed the pathway on the north side, as well as the development of the trailhead to Princess Point, and we're working on the reforestation of the West Soccer Field. And then in the long-term priorities, we are doing the youth climbing structure at the same time as the playground, and as well planting shade trees throughout the park. So that will be part of all of the phases going forward. So as you can see, in the first phase, we did manage to do some of the short, medium, and long-term. And the reason for that is because it made sense to do those pieces together when we were looking at where we were working within the park. So to phase 2, we're looking at some priorities on the north side of the park. So we're looking at a 1.5 meter and a 2.5 meter wide limestone screening pathway in the upper plateau. So that would be here and looping around. You can see which ones look a little bit thinner. Those would be the 1.5 meter ones, and then the thicker ones would be the 2.5 meter ones. Those would connect to the phase 1 walkways and allow people to have greater barrier-free access throughout the park. We are looking at regrading this cricket pitch so that it's more conducive to more sports. This wouldn't necessarily limit the ability to play cricket here, but what it would do is allow more different sports like soccer or baseball or, you know, ultimate frisbee or whatever people would want to play there. We're looking at some grass swales through here. So that would be an extension of the stormwater management initiatives that we completed in the lower part in the phase 1. But I do want to stress that these would be smaller in nature and we wouldn't be looking at any berms in these areas. Looking at the soccer pitches, shifting them a bit to the east so that we can facilitate these low impact development, the stormwater management rain gardens here. And then formal connections to the Royal Botanical Garden trailheads here and here. As well as installing stone seating nodes, so limestone boulders or something similar at the entrances to the park at Franklin and at Norwood, and that would just help people have a spot to sit to wait for a ride or make you feel like you've arrived at the park. So that is an overview of phase 2. I'll just go through a couple things that we really feel are going to be beneficial with this work. The installation of the rain gardens and the drainage swales will help with the drainage and accessibility on the upper plateau. I know that there are some challenges with wet conditions in particular times of the year, and the movement of water into these swales will help with that. The multi-loop walkway circuits, that helps with people getting out and enjoying more of the park and making the connections to those trails. We are hoping to increase the environmental sustainability, and that through the use of the rain gardens and the drainage features, that's an opportunity to do different plantings, pollinator species, and that contributes to the management plan goal of creating a sustainable environment and habitat, and creating space for the RBG to do more forest edge plantings. So work that we have done already is we have completed the archaeology and the geotechnical studies that we needed to do in order to inform how we were moving forward with phase 2. We are working on functional planning and engineering of the walkways, and that is ongoing. If people are unfamiliar with what we mean by functional plan, it's basically a plan that is pre-designed that allows us to make sure that what we want to do is possible without getting into the fine details and the specifications and everything that we would need to be able to go forward with detailed design. So we do that preliminary work to make sure that it's possible. We come and talk to the public and the counselor and make sure that those goals are on track, and then we can go forward with detailed design. So we're here at the public consultation. I would love to be in front of you in a room with you, but here we are working remotely, and I hope that everybody is able to participate as they would in a live event. And I'm glad to be able to at least reach out in this manner. Going forward into the summer and into December, we will complete the detailed design. We'll submit for the permits from the HCA and the Niagara Escarpment Commission. And then our hope is to tender the project early in 2021. So that would be January, February. We do get our best prices from contractors at that time. So that makes a lot of sense for us to target that. And we would be looking at construction start in the summer of 2021. And it would probably take most of the summer into the late fall. So I guess the next question would be, what is left of the management plan, the master plan, to implement once we're done phase 2? So I just wanted to run through those pieces so that we're just really clear about what is left. Of the short-term priorities, a 2.5 meter wide granular pathway extending from Klein Avenue north to Marion, so that's this piece here. The granular pathway from the former teaching gardens in the aviary, but that would be reviewed when the RBG looks at that parking lot. Forest edge enhancement completions on the west side of the senior soccer multi-use field, so that's this piece here. Longer term priorities would be, it was identified that it would be beneficial to have an outdoor teaching garden right here. And that would be a long-term priority that we'd want to do, as well as this pathway that connects to the playground. There's also site furniture signage, trail access gates. We would work with the RBG to see where those are needed and look at those improvements for future years. And working with our facilities colleagues, the buildings on site are also in the management plan and on our radars to do some improvements there. So at the clubhouse as well as the field house. And then finally revitalize the baseball diamond and the soccer field just to improve fencing. If there's any additional grading works that need to be done, that we would look at as a long-term priority. And then finally, there's a rain garden that was in the management plan. We didn't install it in phase 1. We would take a look at whether that is needed to improve the drainage, or if everything's functioning well, we would evaluate that at that time, whether that is still required. So that's my presentation. Thanks.
There were 5 questions that came in. 2 of them are slightly related. And so if you don't mind, I'll start by asking those questions.
Sure.
So Mark has asked, are the grass swales and fields going to be mowed or left uncut?
So in the existing area, those ones have been planted with pollinator plants and are intended to not be cut. And part of the reason is these are plants that help stabilize the soils for the volumes of water and help with the goals of the management plan for more species diversity and things like that. I might ask Ken if there's any of the grass swales on the upper area in phase 2 that are planned to not be planted or that would be mowed. If I can just ask Ken to clarify that piece.
There are grassed swales that we've proposed, and those ones could be mowed. We haven't made a final decision on the planting species yet, but the larger organic shapes that you see there that we've called out as rain gardens, we're going to plant those up with the native species, and it's going to look a little bit different than phase 1 in that we're aiming to plant different grasses and some shrubs, so it'll look more like a garden, almost like the vegetated swales along Parkside.
Thank you, Ken. So I guess the answer to that is yes and no.
This is part B of that, and it was from Virginia. And this relates to the unmowed grass. There's a concern about Lyme disease in the rain gardens, because regardless of the fact people aren't supposed to go in there, they are. Is there some way to help mitigate this from a health risk perspective?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I have worked pretty closely with public health over the last few years about a tick strategy, and I was part of the team that helped develop the management strategy for, how to manage ticks across the city. And the reality that we hear from public health is that ticks are here, and it doesn't matter whether the grass is mowed or if it's long grass, the ticks can survive, in all of these different environments. So unfortunately, the recommendations from public health are to, avoid the areas that, could have ticks if you're worried about those, but that, checking yourself for ticks and being diligent about that and getting the testing if you need to, then that is the strategy that's proposed by public health. We aren't going to be mowing the natural areas to as a tick mitigation strategy. That's not sustainable across the city, and it's not recommended by public health.
I could pitch in on the ticks. Ticks are not a function of mowing or long grass or anything. They're a function of mammals or birds or humans, warm-blooded things. They don't live off plants. And so wherever animals travel, be it a cat, a dog, a person, a fox, that's what moves ticks around. So whether you mow or don't mow doesn't make the difference. It's how often there are animals in that area. And there are animals everywhere, so it's more, they're just around. Certainly within the manicured areas of the Royal Botanical Gardens, for example, you have as much of a possibility, more or less, of picking up a tick as in the unmanicured area. It's a function of the animal population.
The next question probably has an answer both from LAS and from Maureen. It relates to Blair's concern about the city's debt and how much is this project going to cost, phase 2?
So I can start with that. We do have a project ID with existing money in it. So this is not a new ask that we're asking for phase 2. We have a budget of about $600,000 that we are anticipating to use for phase 2. That's one of the reasons why we can move forward at this time, is because we have the funding in place.
Thank you. I guess I would approach that question a little higher up. And state that, in fact, I believe this kind of reconfiguration of space is in fact financially prudent and an environmentally sound, forward-looking way in which to manage public space. And the reason I say that is our gray infrastructure, meaning our stormwater and water system under the ground, is ancient and is particularly taxed, and is not in the end the best solution in which to manage and to protect the integrity of our ultimate catchment places, such as Cootes Paradise and of course the Bay. So what we need to do more of is invest in our public spaces and invest in green infrastructure just like this, so that we can keep that water on site, so that it goes down into the ground naturally, as opposed to surging and going into our pipes, which are way more expensive to invest in, along with our wastewater treatment plant. So I would argue this is both environmentally forward-looking. It's my opinion that this is the way in which we're going to have to design and retrofit our green spaces, and it's also a financially prudent thing to do.
All right, question from Kristen. Is there a possibility to have a pathway connection from the path system to the schoolyard?
So I know that there are some pathways proposed in that area as part of the teaching garden. We can take a look at the connections to the schoolyard. The challenge we do have is we don't like to create pathways to nowhere. So when we're working with properties that are adjacent to schoolyards, often we do collaborate with them and make the connection into their yard as well, so that there is a logical pathway between the school property and the park property. So we can investigate that as a possibility if that's something that the community would like us to look at. I do think that there were conversations with the school at the time of the management plan, and they bought into the plan as it was. So I would have to check with them to make sure that that is something that they would be open to. I think that sometimes there is a concern of inviting people into the schoolyards when school is underway, or other reasons for not making those connections. But certainly from the city's perspective, more connections to places people want to go makes sense for us, and we can take a look at that.
Thank you. We are going to a question about stormwater management. What recommendations from the Churchill Stormwater Management Plan were implemented? It seems that many of the LID recommendations have not been implemented, and why is that?
So if you're referring to the Churchill Park stormwater management components of the management plan, then I would say that we have implemented quite a number of them. Phase 2 was pretty well mostly low impact development in rain gardens in order to address the immediate needs of the stormwater management. In phase 2, we are looking at additional features. If there's a different document that you're referring to, then I'm not as familiar with that one, and I probably would ask to take that away and try to respond to that online when I can go through what the recommendations are and what we have addressed. Unless, Ken, you have something else you can contribute to that one. I'm not as familiar with the specific, if there's a separate report.
Right. Within the management plan, there are a few examples of what LID, the form of the LID that we could look into. I must say that we worked through the engineering component of the project, and our solution was keeping in the same wavelength as LID, as most of the principles in widely accepted principles in the industry.
All right, from Martin. The trails will invite biking, which is good. Will the trailheads at Franklin, Norwood, and also Devon be constructed so there is easy access from the streets for bikes, also for strollers, etc.? Right now, the access to the gravel trail at Devon is not bike or stroller friendly.
So we do look at that. We understand that people will be coming with bikes and even little kids on bikes and strollers to watch soccer games and baseball games and all of that. We will take a look at Devon for sure, but at all of the new entrances, we would aim to make that as accessible as possible for ease of access.
Question from Virginia. Why is there fencing along the path next to the trees along Parkside?
We're in the warranty stage of the phase 1 contract, and in the next few weeks, I assume, we have a contractor coming in to add some round river stone in the center line of the vegetated swale, just to make it a little bit more structurally robust to handle the flows of the water that we've been seeing. As any of you who've been in the park in the last month or so have seen, we're still working on that vegetated swale zone, and we're still touching up some of the pathways that we've seen have shifted slightly. So that fence itself is around the trees because we're going to do what we call terrace seeding. Terrace seeding is basically a blown in grass seed that also has soil within it. So we wanted to make sure that that grass seed has a chance to germinate. And so we've had to fence that zone.
In page 51 of the document, it didn't say in page 151 of the document that it would be mowed.
Plan likely.
Yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so if there's a specific question like that, I think probably that's best for us to do that through the website. We'll put the page up, we'll highlight what we're talking about, and then we can clarify from there. But if you're talking about there's different zones of the park or within the NEPOS system, from the NEPOS system, it is within the development zone of the NEPOS, not the natural lands. But I know for sure in the management plan there was discussion about there was more naturalized areas, there was more developed areas, and specific to the grass mowing, I think that piece with the phase 2, we were looking at what was going to be an effective way to move the water. And so that's the decision between planting of the swales versus having a mown grass swale. Did that help?
I don't know, but I'm hoping if it didn't, that I can connect you and the people that are asking this question for more clarification. Perfect. And then once you have that clarification, perhaps you can post the answer in whole.
That sounds great.
Okay, so this question is from Al. He said, would it make sense, given our current state of COVID existence, to make all of the paths fit for wider measurements instead of some being wide and some being more narrow?
I can see why you're asking that. I think the challenge is that we want to balance providing an amenity versus the costs of doing that and the space that's available to fit it in. So the 1.5 meter wide pathways are that narrow because there isn't the space to put a 2.5 meter pathway in there. And we also anticipate not as much traffic in that area. I think I understand that there's people on mobility devices and that would be more challenged to move off of the path. And that's maybe where your concern comes from. Most users would be able to step off or bike off the path to be able to avoid contact with people if they wish. I really hope that we're not stuck in pandemic mode forever and that we're able to get back to a more close contact living and that it wouldn't be a concern in the future. But I think at this time, the space is limited and the funds are what they are. So we're trying to do the best we can with the money and the space and the resources that we have. So I think at this time we wouldn't consider making the pathways wider than they are now.
Another question from Mark. Have you considered how close the path is to the senior soccer field? It seems there will be less than a few meters between the edge of the soccer field and the path. The path is very close on the side along the forest where the teams and coaches usually sit.
So that's a good comment, and that's something that we normally look at in detailed design. So right now we have a plan that is a lot of blobs on a page. When we get actual survey information and the detailed design starts, that's when we look at making sure we have enough setback. There's usually run out spaces around soccer fields for players to sit and coaches, as well as players as they're running to the side of the field, they're not going to barrel into somebody. We do try to have space and buffers for those, and we'll take a look and see what we can do. The space is tight, so I know that we'll try to do our best, but I do also want to say that usually the colors on the page that show the size of the soccer field, that's not necessarily the lines of the soccer field. That's the size that we anticipate needing in order for it to have that amenity, and usually the lines are within that space. So there is a buffer already incorporated in that graphic.
Blair, for environmental concerns, will you only buy plants that do not come in single-use plastic? These end up in landfills forever. Also, having lived in Parkview for 25 years, we have never seen water run over the park to the road to storm sewers. Just saying.
I'll address the first piece first. That is a procurement question, and what I'm happy to bring up with our staff. The challenge we have right now is when we put tenders out, we don't have an ability to evaluate the methods or the suppliers or things like that the contractors use. That's up to them to do. But I do know that there is a movement for more social procurement, and that could tie into environmental procurement as well. And we could have some criteria to encourage contractors and require contractors to do things like that, you know, source plants from places that use recyclable containers or other methods. That's something that's relatively new for the city, and I know that we're trying it out in some areas, and I can have a conversation with our procurement staff specifically about that and see what we can do. At this time, though, the methodology we have to award contracts to contractors really is limited and not within our purview to be able to tell them one way or another. Oh, the running of the water. Yeah, so the rain gardens are designed to capture the stormwater from the street to help alleviate with basement flooding. So the water wouldn't ever have ran from the park to the street. We're trying to get the water off the street into the park as part of the function to alleviate the need to go into those streets and do massive stormwater infrastructure improvements, which I've been told really aren't feasible, which is why we came up with this solution to be able to take the water. Yes.
I just, thank you so much, Cynthia. I just wanted to call on Tice, if I may, because part of the rationale, as I understand it, for some of the low impact development was also speaking to the integrity of the banks and therefore the integrity of the marsh. And I guess I will put you on the spot there, Tice, if you wouldn't mind speaking to that function as well of the design. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say the water issues came in three layers. Of course, there's the street flooding, which then is also contributing to the combined sewer overflow water. So if you're taking water off the street, it's basement flooding and combined sewer overflows. In the park itself was formerly a construction area, so it's not the natural grades of the land that would have developed over 10,000 years. So we have water running and pooling in the park where it wouldn't have historically done so. And so the natural drainage pattern associated with going down to the marsh is impaired, and you get erosion in places and new sort of ravines gradually, early days, gradually forming where there didn't used to be water runoff to deal with, well, that's what happens. The steep slope erodes away. So we're trying to intercept this water that found a new way to travel with the past history of construction of the park and infiltrate it instead of run it down a slope that never had water running down it. And of course, the other part is the park just has standing water all over the place, and so a little regrading moves the water around and dries up the park for general use, but then catches it in specific locations to infiltrate it.
That's the end of the questions. There have been people making some notes in the comments. I'm trying to watch 4 different screens here. So there is some concern about the soccer fields and the relationship to the past, and they were hoping that you will consult with West Hamilton Youth Soccer Club to just talk about that proximity.
Yep, I can commit to that. Yep.
Okay. And then we have the TIC activity, but I'm going to connect the folks on the TIC activity directly with your team and with Tice, and perhaps we can have somebody from public health also speak to that in order to help see if we're accurately answering their questions in a way that they feel is from an expert point of view.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful. And we have some very knowledgeable staff in the vector-borne diseases section of public health, and I can connect you directly with the people who are leading the tick strategy, because they have all of the up-to-date information, and I'm really just kind of the conduit here for some information that I know, but I'm sure that there's a lot more updated information that public health will have.
Thanks to everyone for joining us this evening. It's a lovely evening, and the fact that you took this hour out of your night means that you care about this space, and we all do. Reference was made to COVID, and I would argue that while COVID-19 may at some point pass, I think it would be unwise of us if we did not heed the lessons that this pandemic has brought to our attention. And I think that is the fundamental importance of good public space. It doesn't always have to be big, but it has to be accessible. It has to meet the needs, which are various, of the people who live. It must be equitable in that everyone is deserving of some place in which to go and walk and breathe. And I also think it's the onus is on us to keep championing that, because the COVID is also bringing, it will bring calls for great austerity. It's been very costly and impacted us, everyone. And so we have to ensure that when we are using public money, we invest wisely. And sometimes we have to pay attention to what those returns are. And sometimes it's really difficult to enumerate the returns that good public space could bring us. But I think it's demonstrated in this public health crisis that it's pretty priceless. So thank you very much. And thank you to Cynthia and Ken and Megan and Tice and Stephanie for helping us this evening. We will commit to getting those comments and questions all in one bailiwick. So if your neighbors weren't able to join us tonight, it'll be accessible, and we're always open to questions and comments. Ward 1 at hamilton.ca. So please don't hesitate to connect with us at any time. Thank you again.